How much time did you have with Joaquin Phoenix before principal photography?
Yeah, as a cameraman, a cinematographer, you don't necessarily spend that much time. It depends on the movie, of course, but it depends also on the director and how much rehearsing they do. And you may have, if you have a director that does a ton of rehearsing, you may spend more time prior to the movie starting, working with those actors and understanding a little bit of them. And there are certainly filmmakers like Sidney Lumet and other guys that like literally will rehearse the whole movie with all the actors. And Todd's not one of those guys. Joaquin, I think, is also not necessarily one of those big rehearsal guys. I think he's a classic gamer in sports metaphors. He just wants to, when it happens, he wants it to be captured, and he sort of wants it to be when the movie's happening for real. So my interactions with Joaquin were very, very small and nominal leading up to the first day of shooting. I'd see him for makeup hair tests, and certainly when he was like in the office trying the makeup on for a couple times, I'd come in, I'd take some still pictures of him, I'd have conversations with Todd about, but it wasn't like we spent much time together at all. My first real interactions with Joaquin, in a real sense, was basically day one of shooting. Watching him perform like for the first time, first shot.
Wow.
And then over the course of making the movie, we shot the movie in 58 days. Then the relationship really formed and became a relationship by the end where there was a lot more interaction, conversations, and certainly I think we both understood each other a little bit more. He understood what I was trying to do with the movie. I certainly, of course, had seen what he was doing with the movie, and so there was a lot more interaction by the end.
Yeah. And his ability to make this character who, in the end, is powerful in a destructive way, but seems so fragile. So, I mean, there's so many times I wanted to put my arms around Arthur. I felt so, like, he just was so fragile.
I agree. Well, that's the whole beauty of the way he sort of built the arc of the character with him and Todd is, I mean, meek is one word, but it's not really that. He's just a gentle person. Like, his place in the movie in the early stages is one of accommodating to some extent, right? There's just like there's a sense of he just a real human sense to him. I mean, he just really created a very human character that has all the frailties and all the things, and it makes even the power of him wanting to be a comedian, which is such a high profile. I mean, to me, comedians, and obviously with Todd having done so many comedies, and I've certainly shot a lot of comedies, comedians are the most fascinating people. And I feel like to stand up and do comedy is the hardest thing in all of the creative arts. I really believe that. I think you are the most vulnerable and naked because jokes are jokes, right? Like, you go out to set out to do comedy, it's like what his mom says, is don't you have to be funny to be a comedian? It's like, it's cut and dry, it's black and white. Like, you stand out in front in a spotlight and you try to tell jokes. If people aren't laughing, essentially you're not a comedian. And it's pretty straightforward. And there's not a lot of argument. You go out and make something that's supposed to move people. Generally speaking, you don't know that. And you're not knowing it instantly. You don't sense it from the audience. There's a lot of internal stuff. And I respect so much anybody who tries stand-up comedy. So to me, what a cool device to take this person that's so small, and like you say, you want to hug him because he's obviously dresses up like a clown and he has to perform, so he has that part of him. But that dichotomy of character, the fact that he is this person that, like, even when he's stretching his shoes and you see the frailty of his body and how skinny he is, and when he gets the gun from Randall, he's even in that moment, he's just like, I'm not supposed to have a gun.
Right.
Like, it's all very small and all very, and I think those elements of Arthur's character and what Joaquin did with him, and Todd, of course, to me, is such a beautiful thing because you see this massive dichotomy even within the same human being. And I think that's what the movie's exploring, right? It's exploring those two sides of all of us. That are battling constantly, right? There's like a side that doesn't want to be seen, and there's a side that wants to be seen. There's a side that wants peace and harmony, and there's a side that wants chaos and madness, right? And I think that's really what the movie deals with on a grand level, and which direction do you decide to take yourself, you know? And you know, I think in all of us, we try to be good, but sometimes we're fighting our inclinations to be rageful and angry and all these things. I don't think there's a person among us who's not suffering from that part of ourselves, right? That's what being a human being is. And I think here you're seeing it explored over the course of a 2-hour movie in a way that I think is pretty effective.
And you could even take, and this is going off on a tangent a little bit, but Andy Kaufman, who had that same thing, and when he needed to be larger than life, he could be, but then he could be Latka, you know?
That's right. And that was a good example of somebody who almost seemed mad. Like when he decided to be the other Andy Kaufman, the one that was like angry, and it was often that exact thing, right? Somebody gentle matched against anger, right? It's like the aggressive Andy Kaufman that would fight the wrestler and getting punched by David, you know, like
right.
on the David Letterman show, all those things. Like that's a complete opposite spectrum of his personality. But when he was in that personality, he was in it so deeply that he seemed almost mad, right? And insane. And so, yeah, I think it's a good analogy as well.
Since you had very few meetings with Joaquin Phoenix,
Yeah.
correct, before shooting principal photography, how are you building trust with an actor?
That's a really good question. I think you build it as you make the movie. Honestly, I think it's you're not necessarily, you know, there's a certain level of trust perhaps based on your previous work, and either they like the work or they're not, you know, and frankly, I don't even know. I don't know what Joaquin had seen of mine outside of what he'd probably seen of Todd's. He certainly trusted Todd. By proxy, maybe the things that Todd had done successfully, certainly over the last 5 films that I had done with him, perhaps that gave Joaquin the trust. But I think it's no different than Todd gaining trust with Joaquin. I think it happens every day in small ways, right? And I think you're just constantly looking to each other, and he's looking for signs, and I'm looking for signs of trust, and we're just trying to build that trust over time. And you know, that's every movie and everybody. I mean, sometimes the hardest part is when you have an actor that comes in for just a day or two, and they've obviously have a lot of experience and are quite, you know, good at what they do. And in all those situations, or an actor that's just there for one day, you're trying to find a place to build trust. It's one of the fun things about working on movies is everything is kind of in hyperspeed. You know, you work in an office, perhaps you get to know an office worker over the course of 6 months, a year, and then many, many years. But even in an office situation, day one for that person, they're all looking for signs to build trust, right?
I've worked in some offices like that. Yeah,
it's just like it's part of human nature, right?
Sure.
We're just like, and I've always found like that part of filmmaking to be a subset that's very interesting to me, is the fact that you take these disparate people, you put them together, they all have special skills, they come together on a project that the stakes are quite high. Sometimes they're made for hundreds of millions of dollars, and you all have to come together and work together quite quickly. Like you don't have months to get to know each other. You know, you often have just days to get in a situation in which everyone kind of knows their role, the boundaries, who's in charge. It's a very, I've eternally find it fascinating, just the way movies work as a piece of art and as a piece of commerce, and I'm always interested in that. And so you learn some of those things. But I think for Joaquin, you know, it's also, he started watching some stuff played back on the monitor, and he could watch some stuff on dailies. And I think in watching that, I think he started to understand what the movie was beyond his work. Because, you know, as an actor, he's doing his thing. But he also has to trust that the editing is going to work and the cinematography is going to work, and everybody is coming together to like, he might think he's doing this amazing thing, but all that matters is also, are we capturing it? You know? And if he did it and we didn't quite capture it, well, then we're not in sync. So I think it's an important, aspect of filmmaking is that trust thing, and I think sometimes you don't get it. In this, I think one of the things I remember texting Todd very early on, I want to say it was like day 3, and it was just like a text of saying, oh man, I think our first 3 days are going really well. And it wasn't even a kiss-up email. I know Todd for the ages, and we we were far from ever kissing each other up. But I was actually genuinely saying how impressed I was, how well he works with actors, because I've also done it myself, in that he's able to gain trust very quickly and make them feel like they're in a really safe place and that there's a really good give and take. And I just remember thinking, oh, this movie is working well so far, earlier than I thought, because a lot of movies take weeks, simply because I could see how much Joaquin already trusted Todd, and I thought that was a good sign for sure. Yeah.
What's the most emotion you felt filming Joaquin's performance?
That's a really good question. I mean, I felt it so many different times. I felt it, I think when he performs at the comedy club is a pretty powerful one. Just watching him be so exposed on stage, sort of failing, but just carrying on, and just there's something in his eyes in that scene that always gets me. The scene when he is trying to get the papers from the clerk, Brian Tyree Henry, and that little one-on-one scene with the sort of in between the clerks, the grate that's in front separating them. There's just, I love that performance of that scene. I find it to be mesmerizing. I'm always sort of leaning forward when I watch that scene with him. I mean, there's probably many. I'm just trying to think of the ones that popped to my head first. I think that scene on the bus. Certainly shooting that scene on the bus. We shot that scene, I think it was day 2 or day 3 maybe. Day 2 actually. So it was the second day of our shooting. It was that scene on the bus with the kid and the little boy. And just shooting his side of the action, right? It's all cut up, obviously, like a scene now. But just shooting him perform that scene that early in the shoot, I went, oh my God, this guy is something else. This guy is the best I've ever seen. And what he's doing already with this performance and what he's doing to create Arthur Fleck as a human being who's suffering, I thought it was beautiful. Because in that one scene, he's doing everything, right? He starts having just gotten beaten up by a bunch of kids in an alley. So he's coming into the scene, still living in that space, looking out the window. And then he's now trying to connect and do his thing, which he's sort of conditioned to do as a human being, but also who he really is, which is to try to make some little boy smile. And then he's sort of reprimanded for it, and then goes into this this laughing fit, which I think always embarrasses him because it's on something he can't control, and then has to hand out this card that describes it. So in that one scene, it kind of shows all the facets of him as a human being, and I always found that scene to be really, really powerful.
And also, too, the scene in the bathroom where he confronts his...
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
That's a very powerful scene.
And
where he's really, truly, just reaching, it's like he's just trying to find a connection, and just trying to sort of find that part of him that's missing, whether it's his father or just another person to help, be there with him so he's not so lonely in this world,
And the scenes with his mother when they would watch the game show or the talk show.
Yeah, that's a lovely scene in the beginning. Yeah, or even when he's washing her hair, it's lovely. It's like these two people have each other in the world, and I think that's what makes the revelation of her and what she did to him as a youngster, and allowing his abuse and some of those things, what makes it obviously so powerful when it's revealed.
Sure. Will you ever laugh or cry while you're filming?
Oh, for sure. I've definitely laughed. I mean, I've laughed out loud. Obviously, Todd and I have made a bunch of movies in which, not many times, but I've certainly laughed enough that it's gotten on the soundtrack, and I'm like, oh, we obviously you can't affect the take, but I've cried in certainly operating the camera and watching a scene before, for sure. For sure, I've done that in movies that I've been a part of, yeah. Yeah, sometimes you're just incredibly moved when you're watching something happen for real. Sometimes you can separate yourself and go into sort of work mode in which you're thinking about the next shot, and like you're not as present as you'd like to be. But when you are watching somebody work at a really high level and they really are just performing it, in that way, it drags you right back into the present in the best way possible, and you're compelled to just have nothing else in your head except to watch that person perform, and then it can become amazingly powerful. And even if, like, I'm not sure I cried, and I certainly laughed watching Joaquin, because there was a lot of physical humor in the movie that some of it's not in the movie still, but just in the way that he could do, whatever it was doing, like, falling down, or just his physicality. And, the scene when he gets fired, it was a little bit of a longer scene than is in the final cut of the movie. And when we shot that scene, there was sections of that I just I was heartbroken by, because he really wanted that job, and you recognize that losing that job was really just it was very powerful to him, and I remember when we shot that scene feeling really moved, for sure.
Yeah, and I think that one was one of maybe 3 where, I definitely
it's like,
had the tissue out.
Yeah, he's definitely, again, he's a human being in spite of all who he becomes, and this sort of like villain that the Joker is supposed to be. At his heart, he's still just a man.